Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also," and he meant it. That's one of those literal passages in the Bible. I think there's a lot more of them than most, but most everybody acknowledges that in that portion he is explicitly talking about money and more than money. But he's warning against love of money and worldliness and mammon, and that's always been a primary Christian concern that the Bible explicitly points to, especially all over the New Testament. And then the Methodists have been concerned about. John Wesley, who was the OG, revivalist at the head of the Methodist revival, warned against the love and allure of money consistently, but especially near the end of his life as he was watching the role that money had in compromising the loyalties of Methodists in that revival. And of course, we have a long and unfortunate history of that has most recently resulted in a lot of trust being lost at the tail end of my church and many others leaving the United Methodist Church that I and many others consider to have been faithless with the money. We created a structure that was very top heavy, where local churches were asked very greatly to support this superstructure that actually was aligned against us and hated us and was not accountable to us. Now, I don't mean to convey that there was no transparency at all in the United Methodist Church. I was actually I've come to very much appreciate the ways in which they reported a lot of stuff around membership and attendance and money, and I'm hopeful that we can not only match their standard in the Global Methodist Church, but actually outdo it. I'm very much in favor of a future of great transparency, not for the sake of paranoia, but for the sake of showing that the trust we give is well earned. And I have every confidence that that is currently the case because I've had the good fortune of speaking with Matthew Conover, who's the CFO of our denomination, several times. And I've also spoken with Harrison Bell, who is today's guest on PlainSpoken. He is the head of the Finance Administration, Pensions, and Retirement. I think it's retirement. No, Pensions and
Benefits.
Benefits. I got it wrong. Committee. He's sits at the top of the whole denomination and on the Connectional Commission, which is the central board that is responsible for the whole denomination. So he sits at a really good position where he and I have privately spoken, and it's clear to me that we have great leadership in many of our committees. If you haven't seen my conversation with Clark Atkins of the Conferences Committee or with Chris Ritter of the Global Episcopacy Committee, I'm just really impressed with the work being done. We put out a financial report a month or two ago that pleased me very much. I'm hopeful that we can build on that and go in that direction. And so we're going to learn more about where things stand, how things are being done, what goals are being set today. You should know, just on the front end, I'm friends with Harrison on Facebook. We don't know each other very well yet. I'm hopeful that I'll be friends with him and everybody in the future. But he's a pastor at St. James Church. He's a graduate at Asbury Theological Seminary. He's serving in Alabama, and I don't know much about him professionally outside of that. So we're going to learn about him. We're going to learn about his committee and about what God is doing among the Global Methodists now. So hopefully you're on board with me for that. If you're not, I don't know why you've listened this far,
Awesome.
but you might stay anyway. This is my friend Harrison. Harrison, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Jeff.
Yeah. Let's talk about you just for a little bit. I think it's important as people bring us news and information to know who they are. So if you could tell us where you come from, add some texture to the Asbury stuff, to the ministry stuff, and at the tail end, it's okay if you forget any of this. I'll just remind you. But talk about kind of theologically what you understand your function to be right now at the head of your committee.
Yeah, and so I serve as the lead pastor at St. James Church in Montgomery, Alabama, right outside of Montgomery in a little suburb called Pike Road. And I came here in 2019 as their executive pastor, and then Lester Spencer, who is the conference superintendent of Alabama Emerald Coast Conference, was serving as lead pastor here at that time, had been for since the mid 90s. And we went through a succession process that in 2023 that led me to be the lead pastor, and have absolutely loved it. And we are doing really exciting things here and just absolutely love being a local church pastor. Love investing in my community here. But originally, I'm from Northeast Tennessee. And so I was ordained in the Holston Conference of the United Methodist Church and served in churches there, in a few different churches. I'm technically in my sixth appointment here at St. James of different churches I've had leadership in, all the way from very large to very small. And I've just been absolutely blessed in that. And so happy to be here. And several years ago, while the WCA was beginning to dream about what a potential denomination could look like, they created task forces to explore different areas. And I was asked by Keith Boyette to serve on the Connectional Funding Task Force. It was chaired by Steve Wood, who is now a retired pastor in Georgia. And he and Bishop Lindsey Davis, who is a retired UMC bishop, also served to guide that. And we began having discussions about, okay, how do we deal with apportionments and in the new denomination? And so spent a year in the middle of COVID talking about those things, trying to decipher and discern the best way to have a new denomination and how to guide its funding. And a few things became really clear in that I think became the foundation for values that we currently have. And that is that we wanted to be very lean in our nature, at least at the top of the denominational level. We wanted to be as lean as possible. I think in coming from the Deep South, there is a high distrust in all things, but especially coming out of the UMC, as you just mentioned a little bit earlier, Jeff, just a distrust. And so we wanted to be as transparent as possible. We wanted to make sure there was accountability all along the way. And then probably the value that we most spoke about was, how do we be local church first? And so that was just absolutely critical to us. And so we spent a year on that, made recommendations, and then began living into that as a denomination. The Transitional Leadership Council lived into a lot of our recommendations, which was really nice. And we set connectional funding at technically 1.5% of all unrestricted revenue that a church brings in is the ask, right? One of the pieces that I like saying is that we are a coalition of the willing, not the constrained. And so we want to work with churches that can't do that, or that not yet can do that. We don't want to be like Big Brother, always like looking down. We want churches to be excited to be part of this denomination. Just crossed into 6,000 churches. We are extremely fast growing, and our church, and I, as an elder in the church, I'm excited to be part of this. And so I hope it's a want to, not a have to. But anyway, led through that, and then we had transitional commissions before the convening general conference, which was last year, that formed, and I was elected to be the chair of the finance transitional commission. And then after that, the beginning of this year, became part of the permanent commission, and then was elected to be its chair. And I will be the first to tell you, my financial knowledge is very limited. I am not a financial expert. I served as an executive pastor. I guess that's what made people believe that I was good at it. But I guess I'm decent at leading a meeting. I'm decent at getting people to talk with each other and to help come to conclusions, and good at dealing with people that are maybe CPAs, looking at the very fine detail and trying to get them to see things a little bit bigger. And so it's been real fun, and I love the people that I get to serve with on the commission. I love the staff that we get to serve with. Matthew Conover and Mike Schaefer are part of our commission. And so we're constantly working and trying to support them in the best way that we can. And I think we've been able to already accomplish a lot of really good things, but a lot of really good things to come. So I'm really excited about that.
Well, in case I forget to say it later, thank you for serving in that capacity. We need someone to do it. And I think some people might be alarmed to hear you say that you're not a financial expert. I forget the exact way you phrased it, but I want to just say briefly how important I think that is actually. Um, Back in the day when I was in the United Methodist Church, alongside the Book of Discipline, which stipulated the different committees that a church has to have, they produced a series called Guidelines, which was, these 30 to 60 page documents that told you ideally how each church committee functions and established it theologically, but then talked about the nuts and bolts. And it was actually really good. I don't know, I got a lot out of it. And one of its insights was when you're looking for leadership in the finance committee, you should not be looking for the bankers, the people who work in the finance sector in your community. You should be looking for the people who love Jesus the most, because those are the people who are going to do the due diligence and have the needed theology and doctrinal conviction to operate as Christ would have you operate in the church. We're not called to be first and foremost financial gurus. We're called to be Christians. And just because you know about money doesn't mean you know about Jesus. But if you know
That's
about
right.
Jesus, then you know about right relationship with money. And so when you highlight the gifts and graces God has given you to be able to ask questions of experts, put them in dialogue with each other, lift up other voices that need to have input in this process, that's exactly what's needed. I don't think it needs to be, oh, shucks, Harrison doesn't have some financial knowledge that I really wish he would have. It's, oh, thank God we have somebody in this position who's actually a people person, who's actually established in the faith. Could you talk just briefly about your own theological identity? People maybe would make assumptions based on where you went to seminary, but how would you characterize your personal theology and the doctrine that you preach in the pulpit?
Yeah, so I started pastoring. I became a licensed local pastor when I was still an undergrad, as at 21, and started pastoring a church, and had just several good years of being loved on as a young pastor who didn't have a clue what they were doing. I just felt a call. Very little theological understanding or training. At that point, my undergrad's in a philosophy, but at a secular university. And so very little about that. But then was able to go to Asbury and became a disciple of Ken Collins. And he has shaped so much of my theology and the way that I see the world and see it through, I think, not a necessarily a Methodist lens, but a Wesleyan lens. It even kind of, and I found myself since even, uh, Ken Collins would say that our theology is a both and, it's not an either or.
Hmm.
And so it embraces mystery. And so I find myself even with some reform tendencies a little bit, but I think it's a both and piece a little, somewhat. And so, yeah, just really proud of that heritage, and uh, really proud to be Global Methodist. And yeah, one of the pieces I lead our staff through this every week. It just stays on my desk, right? So just leading people through our catechism, but specifically the De Silva annotation for the catechism has just been super helpful for our church and for our staff to really try to embrace our faith. And I think one of the best things we did as a Global Methodist Church was create a catechism for us to really get good instruction in our theology, not just the ecumenical orthodoxy, but also our particulars. And so, yeah, does that answer the question?
It does a lot to answer it. Now, viewers or listeners are not necessarily going to know all that is there, but I have actually done some work to equip you in that. I just got done. I don't know if you know this, Harrison. I interviewed Ken Collins just yesterday, and so I'll be publishing that interview next week. And we had a really good time. He's ready for me to publish. I've just got some other stuff to put out before that. And then I've also interviewed David De Silva about that very same book you just lifted up, the annotated version of the Catechism. I've also spoken with Teddy Ray. I didn't record it, but I learned about the production of the Catechism, how it is they came up with those questions and answers. And the long and short of it is, it's meant to reflect the content of our official doctrine, the Articles of Religion, the Confession of Faith, Nicene, Apostles' Creed. It's a really solid resource. So I think you're very wise to lead your people through that. So for viewers or listeners who don't know those people, these are things that are all available to you. Well, not the Teddy Ray stuff, but the other documents and thinkers. You would do well to research. Both De Silva and Collins have exercised influence to our benefit. So could you now pivot to talk about your committee? Um, Surely there's more stuff going on than you can possibly cover in this short time. But broadly speaking, could you just give people an idea about what it is, the tasks with which you have been entrusted?
Yeah, so our commission, primarily, there's several buckets. The big bucket is finance, right? So it is uh, financial oversight for the denomination. And so that includes just basic transparency and reporting. How do we do reporting to understand it ourselves? And then what does reporting look like publicly? And then also budgeting. So working with every commission on what that looks like. So we're living into our very first budget this year as a denomination. And so we had just begun over the past week the budgeting process for 2026. And so that's exciting and nerve-wracking in some ways as well, because we do operate, I think, on razor thin. We try to make things as compact and as lean as possible. And so because of that, we're in a very healthy financial position. We can talk about that in a little bit, but as we look at what's around the corner and how do we do this long-term in a healthy way is always one of our main questions. So there's the financial oversight piece. There's also legal support. And that's not just like things that you might think of when we think of legal support, but one of the pieces that is constantly on our front burner right now is what should our denomination's relationship with, let's say, the Boy Scouts ought to be. And so that can be complicated. There's a lot of views on if churches should be chartering Boy Scout troops or not. And if you're familiar, the UMC had a massive settlement several years ago now that just really hurt the denomination. That cost was passed on to annual conferences, which was in turn generally passed on to local churches as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
Legally, how should we deal with that? And so that's just one example of legal matters that we have to deal with. And then, of course, there's the retirement and benefits side of things. So with our currently, the way that we function on the retirement side, on the pension side, is a defined contribution plan. So 403B through Guidestone for eligible clergy. And so we were in conversation with Guidestone. We were the people that made the recommendation to go to Guidestone from Westpath, which was the old provider that we had for a couple of years. And then also around Guidestone's also the health provider. And so that's a big topic right now. And I think it'll be a big topic at General Conference in Johannesburg next year, is at what level does healthcare reside? And of course, one of the challenges with this, and I think it's just a bigger challenge as a global denomination, and we speak about this a lot, is how do we, so much of what we're having to do on the legal side, on the pension retirement side, and on the regular benefits side deals specifically with United States. Mm-hmm. And how do we behave globally in that circumstance, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of the challenges. I don't have like the official published book of doctrine of discipline. I've got this spiral bound one, and one of the pain points that I have is already in this. We're at like 300 pages, and how do we? One of my goals for General Conference would be I would love to leave General Conference with less pages than this. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a challenge. That's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort. But I would really love for every page. I don't know how we get to this, but these are the conversations we're trying to have as well as we look toward that, look toward General Conference next year, is how do we have a global, a book of doctrines of discipline that's truly global, that no matter where I open it up in the world, all of it applies to me. And, but But at the same time, we have to navigate the legal pieces, especially here in the U.S., but just in you know the Western world at larger. How do we still navigate that? I think it's the great challenge of our denomination is how do we actually live into being one? And and I don't have a good answer for that, but I'm happy to be part of that discussion and to try to make us truly global. Um, and we don't want to be a Western church that happens to have global partners and global churches. How do we actually live into that? How do we make the thought center not just be completely Western? How do we make the administration and that is difficult, painful work because of cultural differences, and it's one of the pieces that one of the things, just another kind of bigger issue that I think we are facing is we tend to want to get things settled and get things decided as quick as possible.
Oh, sure.
And the reality is that we have to measure the success of our denomination not in days or weeks, but in years and decades.
Mm.
And it's going to take time to get to where we want to be. And part of the reason for that is I think we need to do a lot of relational work. Um, we need to be in relationship with each other at a very high level, and that just slows the work down. I think of that proverb. I'm part of what's known as Sanctification Network, and we talk about this African proverb a lot, that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. But we often overestimate what we can do in a short time, but we underestimate what God can do in a long time. And so that's what I hope we can do, is really lean into that relational aspect, because I think we could end up really hurting ourselves trying to figure it all out real quick. And what we need to be figuring out is the relational side of things.
That all makes sense to me. What I've wanted to say is I can walk with you and others to the ends of the earth if we're actually a part of the same project. And the harm of the United Methodist Church was we used the same language, but we weren't all the same part of the same and so we had these relationships that were built up over years, decades, that we thought we could depend on. But whenever it came down to it, those relationships soured. And so I don't want to reproduce, the dysfunction of where we came from. So to my mind, we've needed to figure some things out quite quickly, so that we can stand on those things together and then build relationships. And then I heard from a veteran a few years ago that a plan is something you deviate from. I'm not very worried about having a perfect plan right now. I want there to be a plan in place that then we can critique. So as you're talking about the needs to be able to govern different regions differently while also having a book of doctrines and discipline that applies to everywhere. Well, obviously, what would suit that would be something like regional conferences that I and many others spoke against, because it smacked so much of United Methodist regional superiority that we've seen in the United Methodist Church. So we just said, no, we're not going to look like that at all. And then here you and others are having to pick up the pieces going, well, what's really needed is something that could do that, but we outlawed that. So we're going to have to make up something else. And that's really difficult. I don't know that I'm ready to say I'm sorry yet, because I still stand by my feelings there. But also what I'm pretty clear about is having talked to people around the world, a lot of our educational standards that we make mandatory in the US are not feasible in other parts of the world. And then similarly, stuff around pension and health insurance are not feasible in other parts of the world. So it's just this very privileged, all churches shall treat themselves, and they can't, So how can we hold a standard that is the same for everybody else and then regionally operate in ways that are different? And so thank you for laying things out in that way. I think perhaps the most salient financial concern for most of the people watching me is health insurance is just out of control, man. Um, it's it's ballooning in cost year after year. I went on 3/4 time here so that my church would not be burdened with that cost. We have a very small, not high income church, and my wife and I are covered through a healthcare sharing ministry that we pay for independently. That's not really feasible for a lot of churches. We're looking at just massive resources being drained. Is there anything to be done at all about this? I mean, I love who we've contracted with. I'm very happy with my retirement fund. It's ethically invested and it's getting like 13% APY this year. It's great. I'm very happy with retirement. But I don't think anybody can do health insurance right now. I think it's prohibitively expensive. So is that just the end of it, or well, and there's property investment as well, or not
Yeah.
investment,
So
insurance. Yeah, talk
yeah.
for
So
a
when you
bit.
look at let's look at those two insurance pieces quickly. The quicker one's probably the property insurance. One of the a a problem that we hear about weekly are churches being dropped from insurance coverage for a number of reasons. And especially here in the South, where, and this is true in other regions around the US, but we're in hurricane, um, issues that we face on an annual basis, and churches having to procure and secure insurance has been really difficult. And that's a problem we've got to figure out.
Hmm.
How do we how can we ensure that every single one of our churches has insurance? Even here at St. James, I mean, we're a larger church, and you would think that we would have a lot of insurance options. And we use an insurance broker here that searches dozens of options. And for the past 2 years, we've only had one company give us a quote, and so we're stuck and choosing them because no one else will cover us for other issues. We want wind coverage here, which makes it complicated. Generally, when you get to more coastal areas, they remove wind coverage from it, and so um, that's the only way that they can get insurance. And so that's a big issue that churches are going to face and continue facing. Um, and then when you look at the health insurance, especially of clergy, that's a massive issue. And it's one of the pieces. This isn't an excuse, and it shouldn't be an excuse, but it is that everybody's facing this, right, in every sector. It's just health insurance is just out of control. But at the same time, okay, so living into the realities of the current situation, how do we handle this? And what we found is that if we want to have a health insurance plan that is national in its scope, then a few things have to be true. Almost always, with every company we had conversation with, you have to have some sort of mandatory enrollment. And so that's what we have. If you are full-time appointment, you're mandatorily enrolled in the health insurance plan unless you're able to exempt out for a couple of reasons. One is if you're able to go into your spouse's coverage. One is if you have TRICARE through military, or if you are on Medicare. So there's a few ways to be able to exempt out, but generally speaking, you're required to have it.
Hmm.
And because of our population of clergy, we are not the healthiest bunch of folks. And so our premiums are sky high. So for family coverage is over $30,000 a year in premium. And that is painful uh,
Hmm.
to to swallow. The reality is that we could shop that with 100 different companies, and we probably still end up with the best deal we have right now.
That's true.
So I think what's going to happen is, and our commission is wrestling through this because there's a lot of opinions on what I'm getting ready to share. But
Do
I think
it.
there's going to be a lot of legislation around the idea of moving health insurance from the denominational level, or at least the US level, to the conference level, and then probably an encouragement to conferences for conferences to have their churches offer stipends versus offer a health insurance plan at the conference level. And so there's
Let me tell you how
different.
interpreting that uh,
Yeah, go
for
ahead.
non-financial people, I think what that would mean is, well, let me just give a hypothetical. I'm in the Heartland Annual Conference, which covers a few different states. If some people got their way at this general conference, there will be different options. One of them might be, hey, we're not going to have any mandatory minimum standards on the general denomination level. Each annual conference is going to come up with its own healthcare policy, and anything is going to be on the table. They can have no minimum healthcare standards if they want, or they can leave the healthcare system altogether and mandate that there is a stipend given, which would be you'd work out your own formula for this is how much we're just going to make sure the church gives directly to the clergy for their own healthcare, and then they can get on the marketplace and figure out their own healthcare, and then that can just offset whatever the costs are for that. Or hypothetically, I think what I would want to do is, okay, we have a program that everybody can get into, but if they're not willing to take care of their bodies, they get booted out. You know, if they're not going to be respectful of the shared covenant, then we're not going to be in covenant with them. You know, and this I'm all about shared covenant. That's great, but whenever people are like, the young people will pay for it, that's just mean. You know, that's not a good way to be. So that's partly why we're looking at the situation we are, and so I'm in favor of anything but staying on the roller coaster that we're on right now, because I think that thing is just built to crash out. So I love that you guys are asking these questions. I don't hear you saying we're definitely going to be pushing for X, Y, or Z. What I hear you saying is we're looking at all the options. We see that this is indeed a problem, and let a thousand flowers bloom, I guess. Did I hear you
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I think what's going to most likely happen. So our commission, every commission is asked to meet in person once a year. The Connectional Council meets in person twice a year. That's by discipline. Um, we meet in person in January as our Finance Administration Commission, and one of our main docket conversations is how do we talk through this? And if we end up suggesting a change, I want to have our commission lead that effort and be a leading voice in that, so that we can see change. Now, the challenge is that our negotiations with Guidestone take place over the summer months. So usually June and July are those negotiations. And so whatever decisions would be made in Johannesburg next year wouldn't take effect, most likely until 2028. But
Mm.
at least they would take effect in time. And I do think there are strategies to help lower that cost, because I can't imagine being a church having to make this decision. And I'm hearing you say your church had to make this decision. All right, we want to pay our pastor. We're at somewhere, let's say 40 to 60,000 base salary for a full-time pastor, and then you're asking me to pay 50%, 75% more for me to be able to, for our church to be able to offer them health insurance. And that's a huge ask. That is a huge ask. And even in larger churches with multiple staff, when we think about all the staff that need health insurance, that becomes a massive cost.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, really painful for churches that are operating on minimal income, minimal revenue to be able to offer. So I think we have to do something. What, to your point, the way that we are doing it is unsustainable, and it's really hurting our denomination. It's hurting younger clergy, especially, that we're trying to recruit. And I think there'd be a lot of benefit in changing it. And so I have some ideas of what I would like to see. Other people have ideas what they would like to see, but my goal is that our commission would be able to put forth legislation on what we think is achievable. And it's helpful to have people around the table that are experts in insurance, that can help us have these conversations, so we just don't create this utopia. This is, at the end of the day, we need health insurance. And so we've got to do something that's practical and realistic at the same time. And so it's balancing all of that. But I think that's a huge conversation. I think it's critically important. And so I'm glad that these conversations are happening, not only in our commission, but across the connection as well.
Let's talk nuts and bolts just for a little bit. I think it's good to cover basics. So, just thinking about the finance committee. Surely, when it all began, all of you were volunteer, but have there been any full-time or part-time positions created for the work of your committee?
Yeah, so our denomination, slowly but surely at the general level, is increasing based upon, absolute need. Every position, from the smallest position to the largest position, has to be approved by Connectional Council. Mike Schaefer can't just say, all right, I want to hire somebody new and then go do it. All there are checks and balances to try to ensure that we very much so are lean. On my commission's work, there's a few different employees. Obviously, Mike Schaefer gives general oversight of it, but in particular, Matt Conover serves as the executive director of finance for the denomination. And then Molly Williams is his number one assistant. She's technically the bookkeeper for the conference. She's phenomenally gifted in that way.
When you say for the conference, you mean for the committee that oversees
Sorry,
the
yeah,
whole?
for the denomination. Yeah,
Okay.
I misspoke. Yeah, it's for the denomination. And then we have a Brenda Harris serves as the benefits assistant. So as different clergy, she fills out all the information, makes sure everything is in there. And so those are and then there's Terry Casson, who also helps on the benefits. And so they work together to make sure just all that information is done. Rick Van Giesen served in a role, but retired this past summer. And so that might be a name you were familiar with.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
And there was a time when before we were with Guidestone, that the denomination handled everything. And so trying to handle the benefits of a few thousand clergy was a daunting task. And there were times that it was bottlenecked, that we were receiving clergy applications dozens a day, and trying to process all that, trying to get it all together. And it was bumpy and it was rough work. But now
it was really
on the
hard.
back end of it, yeah, that's right. On the back end of it, we're in I think, a really good spot as far as that. And so the staffing,
Yeah,
we want to
I spoke with Jeff Pospisil back in the day. He was the first CFO we had, and it was just so overwhelming. He described to me he was having to do manual data entry on churches and clergy for a long time when it was just first coming together. So I'm very relieved to hear y'all been able to hand things off and that the system has changed since back in the day.
That's right. We've been able to create systems, early days. I mean, when I say early days, just even 18 months ago, we were looking at Excel sheets just full of data. And how we've been able to create systems since then. And then Matt Conover has just been a godsend. It's Jeff Popisil was in a really difficult place all right, how do I manage something that's brand new, that's changing daily?
Right.
And financially, that's really difficult to do. And so Matt inherited a mess, not really because anybody was negligent in their job. It was just the reality of the beast. And then one of the big shifts that we're still in the middle of is, how do we move from being reactive to proactive? And Matt Conover has really helped us on that financial and administration side of things do that we've been able to get the books in order. And so one of the things that we try to be very transparent with all that, the financial pieces, and it's just on the website. If you go to the website, the drop down, there's general church finance is one of the links you can click. It shows our financial values that I mentioned earlier, but then it also shows financial documents. And so
you said that's at the globalmethodist.org website?
Yeah, so globalmethodist.org, and on the drop down, there you go, general church finance.
Yeah, I'll show people what I clicked. You just click right here, and then it has general church finance right here. And then if you scroll down,
at the top, there's our financial values. And then scroll down just a little bit, and then you see financial documents.
Excellent. Look at all that.
And so not only statement of activities, but statement of financial position, balance sheet. You see our general conference budget. all of those. Now we run about 2 months behind on that.
Yeah.
And so, but as far as
I
where
don't
we're
think I
at,
realized y'all are giving out monthly reports at this point. I thought at best it was quarterly, but you're giving out monthly reports, but they're a couple months behind.
that's correct. And
Excellent.
so, um, we really do try to lean into that level of transparency for the people that care. I think for most people, they don't necessarily care to see that, but they like that it's available if they were to want to.
Well, and
And
that's me. Where I've been has been I am not a numbers person. I'm a trust person. And what I want to do is I want to trust you and I want you to show that you can be trusted by putting everything out there that I won't look at, and then trust that there are nerds out there that will look at it. And if you're putting out stuff that's garbage or that's not good, then they can raise the alarm. But if you guys are not regularly reporting in a transparent fashion, then nobody can see. And I've been a part of so many organizations where we thought we could trust. In Oklahoma Annual Conference, where I was, all of a sudden, one year, we're having to make a snap decision because supposedly, even though they can't show it on paper exactly, supposedly we were $2 million in the hole on health insurance. They could never show it. They just said, hey, we need to completely change how we're doing this. We need you to agree. And sorry, it didn't work out. We don't know what happened. Apparently, we've been in the hole like 4 or 5, 6 years. Sorry, we didn't know. Turns out we're not even passing audits. I'm trying not to be bitter about it still to this day. But it's just when that does so much to destroy people's trust in their institution when you're going years without accountability. So I'm just, as I've talked to you, as I've talked to the other guys that have been in charge along the way, it's just been a very constant, we know we cannot do that again. It's not, there are some people at other levels of leadership in the GMC just going, hey, you need to learn to just trust us. And that I find infuriating. But you and the other guys are saying, we know that trust has been lost. We have nothing to hide. God has been really good to us. And here, let us show you. And so Matt Conover did that walk through in video form on the budget about a month and a half ago. I thought that was fantastic, Harrison. The more of that you guys do, the more I'm going to be your cheerleader. And I again, thank you. I'm wondering how much my particular viewpoint is represented at the top or if it's just a lost cause. Because as I hear you talking about operating on a very thin budget, I know what it is to operate on a very thin budget, and it's stressful. And it makes you make decisions that are not based on an abundance, but on scarcity. And that makes faithfulness very difficult. So, what I've wanted is a situation where we can actually give y'all a beefy budget. I don't think we would need to charge anywhere near as much in the local church as they did in the UMC, but have massive reserves for clergy education, disaster relief, education for non-Americans, endowments. I don't know. I like the idea of us having the muscle as long as it's transparently reported and they're accountable to the people. That to me is the trade-off. Is that a lost cause, or do you think? What do you think?
yeah. So one of the things, and when I say thin margins, what I probably should have said is like as lean as humanly possible. So we are constantly in the budgeting process asking. I want my commission. So when a commission, let's say Kingdom Advancement, that's focused on disaster relief, the missional efforts of the church, church planning efforts. When they come and they say, and it's the largest of all the commission budgets, when they come and say we want to do this, it's not my job to say you shouldn't do that or that. It's our commission's job to say, okay, we want to work with you so that you can fund what you feel God's leading you all to do. And so, but we are constantly asking how can we be as lean as possible, right? That's just one of the values. That's the question that's always in front of us. And because also we are still very much so a developing denomination. And a couple of really big pieces. We don't know exactly how the Episcopal picture is going to end up at the end of next year after General Conference. And what we feel confident will happen is that bishops will be full-time, that will be their sole occupation for that time period that they serve as bishop. And so that cost is going to increase that we have for Episcopal costs. Second is the ministerial training fund. And so by discipline, we are supposed to have a ministerial training fund. And we are working with other commissions like higher education on what does that look like, and then how do we fund that? And because those are two big questions. And so one great thing of where we sit financially is we only spend right now about 50% of what we bring in. And so through the end of August, which are the
Oh, that's
financial,
great. Hey, say
yeah,
that again.
so
People need to hear that again.
we spend about 50% of what we bring in right now.
That's
Um,
incredible. I didn't know
and
that.
so, but yeah, so let's say through August, we brought in about 6 million, just a little over 6 million when you include connectional funding, interest income, a few different streams of revenue. Most of that's connectional funding. That's in between $600,000 and $700,000 a month that we receive in that. And then our expenses, so again, a little over 6 million. Our expenses, this is end of August, again, were around 2.7 million.
Oh,
And
that's
so,
great.
the goal is to build a reserve that's not like, we don't want to be cash rich, but we want to be able to be in places to fund these efforts, because we know that 2.7 million is going to increase in time. One of the stop gaps, and our commission have a lot of opinions around this, but the Book of Doctrines and Discipline lays out that for any budget year, our expected income can only be 90% of what was brought in via connectional funding the year before. So
Okay.
let's say we end up bringing, we'll be less than this probably. Let's say it's just for, mathematics sake, that it's $10 million that we bring in connectional funding for the year. That means our budget can only be $9 million. But the reality is
And
it's a little bit
when you
less.
say that, that means that the budget that we approve will have a list of expenses that can only come up to $9 million, so that if more is raised, it's just in excess, it comes up. So that's not saying you can only spend $9 million. Well, is it saying you can only spend $9 million? You have to, however much comes in, you have to just sit on it until it's redesignated, or what?
That's right, for the budget. So there can be expenses outside of that when you're thinking of restricted funds. So if somebody were to give, hey, some natural disaster happens and we bring in a lot of money for that natural disaster, that's restricted money, meaning it's donor restricted. We have to spend it for that purpose. And when we spend that money, that doesn't touch the budget,
That makes
any
sense.
of those donors. And so,
I'm
and there's
looking
a
at the
few,
time, and I'm already very
yeah.
frustrated. I want to ask you 100 other questions. I only have you for 11 more minutes. I'm frustrated. I'm sorry, brother. This has all been so wonderful. I want to have you speak to. You sit on the Connectional Council as well. What I want to know, what I think everybody else would want to know, is you're seeing everything from the bird's eye view. What are the things that we can be praying about for the denomination broadly? Not just the finance stuff now, but you see what the Connectional Council is talking about, working on day after day. Where do our prayers need to be directed? If you were in our position and really didn't know much of what was going on, what are the most important things that you could tell us right now?
Yeah. So one is, I'm so proud of the people that I serve with on Connectional Council. Jessica LeGrone serves as that chair and does a phenomenal job on that. Bishop Mark Webb serves on it as well, and then there's a host of others. Just really proud of the work that we've been doing with that, and really appreciative of it. One of the pieces that I would have a consistent prayer for, I think we are living into this in a lot of ways, but that we continue to live into it. How do we change from being reactive to proactive? And that is a constant effort and a constant struggle at the same time that I think we're doing a really good job at. But to continue that, right? Keith Boyette used to use the term, we're building the plane while we're flying it. And now we kind of have this fuselage, but it's a really incomplete plane right now. And so how do we keep building it while we're flying it? How do we keep spreading scriptural holiness in the midst of it? so that we can support the work of the church. And then I think just generally one of the pieces that I would hope infiltrates the prayers for the Global Methodist Church constantly is how do we continually lift up the local church? How do we trust the local church? I think we get in this notion when we're part of a committee that's at a global level or a conference level that the local church needs us. And
Mm.
that's not true, right? If our commission disappeared tomorrow, if the GMC disappeared tomorrow, the work of the local church goes on.
Mm.
And the question needs to be not what do they need from us, as if we're the people that should be elevated, but rather how can we support them, and so how can we make the ministry of the local church the best it can be.
Yeah.
And that's what, as a local pastor, that's what I'm looking for. And at the same time, so I want to constantly keep that in front of us. And I think when we get removed from that, it's really a slippery slope. And we forget that the primary place where disciple making is happening is in the local church. The primary place that we're spreading scriptural holiness is in the local church. It's not the bishop who comes once or twice a year to speak. It's that local pastor and those Sunday school teachers and small group leaders who are week in, week out, being with their people, investing in them. And so constantly, how do we invest in the local church, lift up the local church, support the local church, and make the local church thrive? And so that that's my prayer for our denomination as we move forward. And I would hope that's the prayer for everyone.
So there are no pressing specific issues that are coming down the pike that you're just like, man, our church, our denomination really needs to pray. We're really deliberating these things, and man, we're just really not sure what to do. So far, it just feels like everything is developing at a good tack. You have the right people in the right positions, and by the time General Conference comes around, there won't be any surprises. There will just be a lot of, there'll be some challenging decisions that need to get made, sure.
Sure.
But everybody's doing their homework. The I's are being dotted, the T's are being crossed. Have I heard you,
I
or is
think
there anything that people need to know about?
there's nothing that seems to be on fire for me,
Okay.
right? It seems like, as a local church pastor, I'm
Yeah.
constantly fighting fires.
Yeah.
Some of the fires I make bigger than they should be. Uh, I fight the least amount of fires in the denomination at that level. And I think it's because there's been a lot of wisdom in who's around the table,
Mhm.
a lot of great leadership for this season of the church. Mike Schaefer is a godsend, and is the leader we need in this time for our denomination. I think the wisdom of especially Mark Webb and Scott Jones leading our Assembly of Bishops, it is fantastic. The new bishops we have that came on last year are doing phenomenal work. And so I think there's a lot of really great things. And then when you think of all these commissions and the leaders that make them up, and I
Mhm.
know that you just had a conversation with, like, Wes Griffin. I mean, just a man of God, most importantly, but a phenomenal leader. And so their commission is this shining example of what great leadership, especially over time. They've worked together longer than all of us put together. But it shows where we can get to. And I'm really excited about that. And then the staff that we do have at the global level are fantastic. I think they share a lot of the values that I've communicated here.
Mm.
And so all of that's been really nice. And it's an honor to be able to serve in that capacity, to help support them. And at least for this season that I'm doing this, it's a blessing.
Well, thank you for. I'm so glad you got a chance to say all that, and because we've already talked before, and I know you. I I just really have enjoyed getting to know you and Clark and Wes and Chris and all the other people that are in leadership. The concern always is that the people that rise to the top are the biggest self promoters, and that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case here. It seems like God has uniquely equipped you guys, and well, Matt Conover. There's so many capable people that, man, I just sleep easier knowing I'm in a covenant with you guys. For
Amen.
people who spent time with us in this time, just want to remind you, I don't take any advertiser revenue. So if you want to support this work that I'm doing, then that's where you got to do it. Plainspoken.locals.com. And then also, if you have input for me about future interviews, if you want to arrange guests or anything, I'm at plainspokenpod@gmail.com. We're about to pray at the tail end of this thing. And what I want to urge you to do is pray with us here in a second. And then once this ends, if you would stop and pray for Harrison and his committee and the Connectional Council. We've had enough failure and betrayal. And how about we pray for a win? How about we pray for God to be glorified among the people called Methodist? How about we choose to be hopeful together as Harrison and his compatriots do what is asked of them? How about we do our part too? So, with that in mind, let's turn to Harrison, who's going to lead us in a closing prayer.
Yeah. Father, we thank you that you go before us. And before we ever think of you, you think of us.
Mm.
And Lord, I'm so grateful for the ways that you have parted the sea for the people called Global Methodist. And Lord, may we be faithful in walking the path that you have before us. And may we know that whether we turn to the right or to the left, you'll be there guiding us, saying this is the way. So Lord, I just thank you for the women and men who give of their time and that care about this movement, that want to see this movement thrive for your glory. And so, Lord, we just ask that you would work through us in supernatural ways. Help us to be a light on a hill. Help us to spread scriptural holiness throughout all of this land, for we know that it will all glorify you. And so, Father, I thank you for this time. I thank you for Jeff and the ways that he cares about our movement, that he cares about you and the church, your bride. And so, Lord, I just lift him and his ministry up, that you would continue to pour out your favor and your blessings upon him. And go with us. And it's in Christ's name we ask all of these things. Amen.
Amen. This has been Reverend Harrison Bell. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you very much.